Hi, I'm Steve Gedeon, a professor at one of the largest entrepreneurship programs in the world at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. But today, I'm coming from Killian Court, from the world-famous MIT, my alma mater, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just across the Charles River from Boston. They say going to MIT is like getting a drink out of a fire hose. My first class there had 26 required textbooks. I've got about 6 or 7 books to cover today, so let's get right into it. We've already covered the difference between planning or farming-based approaches using causal reasoning and search-based effectual reasoning that entrepreneurs use to discover goals and new business opportunities. We've given you the first entrepreneurial principle, the bird in the hand principle, where you start with only your own given means to say, what's my character, what do I know, and whom do I know? We then talked about the design thinking diamond as the second principle. Now this is really deeply based on the scientific method. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what's in your head or your hopes or your wishes or your dreams of what you think a viable business might be. You have to test it against reality. Reality decides whether things are true or false, and that you use the experimental method or the scientific reasoning using divergent and convergent thinking and a bunch of other tools to discover the laws of reality. This is the same way that we discovered oxygen, the periodic table, the same reason we discovered F equals ma. It doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is understanding reality. Your senses are valid, run tests, and discover what works and doesn't work. Third major principle we talked about last week was the idea of radical collaboration, radical candor, and the crazy quilt principle, that 2 heads are better than 1. And if you get a design team of people with T-shaped profiles, with diverse skills, they outperform single individuals. We also gave you a variety of tools and assignments as we go through this experimental procedure or the diamond, that we talked about the wheel of life, personality tests, using post-it notes to visualize, creating 2x2 matrices, seeking patterns to find insights, and then capturing these insights in either your T-shaped profile or in a SWOT. So up until now, we've been kind of navel-gazing. We've been looking inward at what are my interests or my values, or what am I looking for? What's my design challenge? But now we have entrepreneurial principle number 4, potentially the most important entrepreneurial principle, which is user-centricity. It's kind of like finding a spouse. Don't just ask anyone to marry you. Take the time to get to know that person. Find out if you share values with that person. If they want to have children with you or not. To find out whether they like you. To find out what their hopes and dreams are and where they want to live. The same thing is true of finding either a customer or a user or a partner or a spouse or an employer. That these customers you need to understand before you can discover whether they're the right person for you. We're going to be talking about 4 major kinds of customers in today's presentation. The first one I think of as a qualitative B2C kind of a customer. This is really epitomized by the Stanford D School. And people like IDEO and the Hasso-Plattner Institute, SCE, the Reggio approach. This is one of the most well-known aspects of design thinking. We're going to start with that one. We'll also talk about the more B2C online customer persona, and this is really epitomized by the lean startup, people like Steve Blank, Eric Ries, Ash Maurya, people like that. We'll then talk about B2B. This is what I think of as the MIT methodology, and we're going to be talking about the disciplined entrepreneurship by Bill Aulet out of MIT. And finally, we'll cover a little bit about how these tools can be used by you to find a prospective employer. The first important thing to know about user-centric ideology is that it's changing from making people want things, which is kind of sort of traditional marketing, that you know what you've already built and you're just trying to convince people to buy your thing. So a shift from making people want things to making things people want. And it starts by finding out what their problems are, what their needs are, and what their desires are, and making a deep emotional connection with your users, your customers. And after you understand them, then you figure out what the solution might be. So it's problem first, followed by solution. Doesn't start with, here's something that I've already made, please buy it. It starts with, let me understand you. What might you be interested in me making for you? On the technology side, this is called moving from technology push to market pull. That instead of making your great new gizmo and pushing it onto people, that you first find out, do people want my gizmo or my bioreactor or my power plant or my new technological device or cure or whatever you've got? Rather than just building it and then selling it, you first find out what people want. What does the market want before you build your thing? The change from technology push to market pull. So the first thing to know about the user-centric method is it's a double diamond instead of a single diamond. It starts with finding the problem using a double diamond, using the first diamond, using the divergent, convergent thinking around the problem, and then once you've really clearly understood the problem, then doing a divergent, convergent thinking diamond around the solution. And it doesn't matter, again, what your idea is. It doesn't matter what you want. This is the scientific method. You have to discover the laws of the marketplace in the same way that the scientific method discovers the laws of reality and, that the world is round versus the earth is flat, or it's whatever the Bible says it is, that you can use your own senses and measure reality and discover what's going on. The same thing is true of using these principles and these methods for understanding the law of the market. First find the problem, and then the solution. First example I'd like to give comes straight out of Stanford. This was a group of engineers had spent years and years and millions of dollars developing a great prosthetic arm. And they finally built this wonderful prosthetic arm, and they gave it to a man who had no arm. And they said, here's our prosthetic arm. Here's the solution to your need. They gave it to this guy, and he came back in 2 weeks and said, thank you very much, I don't want it. And he gave it back. And they said, but doesn't it do everything you need? Well, yeah. Well, doesn't it help you open up doors? Yeah. Well, doesn't it help you pick up objects? Yeah. Well, doesn't it make your day-to-day life better? It does all those things. All those features are true, but I feel like a Frankenstein. I feel like a monster. People treat me like I'm disabled. People used to treat me like a normal person. They didn't notice that I didn't have an arm. They treated me like a normal person. But now that I've got this thing hanging off of me, people stop me all the time and talk about it. They open up doors for me. I hate it. Please get rid of this thing. It makes me feel like a monster. It makes me feel disabled. I don't want it. This is where Stanford came into its own in terms of this design thinking. It starts with understanding the user and his need for respect and to be treated like a normal, healthy person rather than being treated like a disabled person. Starts with needs rather than the solution. Another example also arises out of Stanford, that someone invented the MRI. Now the MRI is a wonderful device that you go into it and it measures what's happening inside your body better than an X-ray does, and it helps to diagnose a wide variety of ailments. And one day this guy was visiting the technician and looking at his equipment, and yeah, it works well, and yeah, it does the diagnosis well, and everything's working just fine. And he went outside the waiting area of the MRI, and there was a child who was just screaming and unhappy, and his mother was trying to console him. And he said with some compassion, oh, don't worry, I'm sure whatever your ailment is, that they'll find a cure for it, or they'll find a way to help you. And the mom said, well, we don't even know what the problem is. It's that this diabolical machine in there is so loud, it scared my child. They had to sedate my kid in order to keep him quiet enough to sit through this horrible machine that makes this racket and is causing trauma in my child. And he was shocked and horrified to imagine that his wonderful life-saving machine had traumatized this child. And so what they did was they re-envisioned the user experience, looking at this horrible experience through the eyes of a child. And instead of putting these children into this machine that makes a bunch of noise, they turned into a pirate game. And they had a video ahead of time, and, oh, you're hiding out from the pirates and there's going to be a lot of noise. And they put headphones on the child, and they said, oh, shh, be quiet, the pirates are coming. And the child would quietly lay there and he'd hear all the noise and be playing a game. And it went from having to medicate children and traumatize people and give them bouts of claustrophobia to it became a fun game. Kids would go through this experience and want to do it over again. Now that's looking at things from the user's point of view rather than look at things from the technology point of view or from the solution point of view. So the big lesson here is it starts with the first diamond is finding problems, a diamond around finding problems, and then a diamond around looking for solutions. Similar to the diamond that we showed before, there's a wide variety of tools from a wide variety of methods and authors that will help you on your double diamond process. So it could include things like doing secondary research, interviewing, fly on the wall, customer persona, beachhead persona, using journey maps and 2x2 matrices, using a customer profile canvas from value proposition design, using the point of view tool from the Stanford D School, doing brainstorming or mind mapping in the solution divergent thinking phase, and then during the convergent thinking phase of the solution, looking at prototyping, minimum viable products, building websites, doing A to B testing. There's a large number of different tools that map onto this double diamond, and I'm going to cover some of them right now. So the first one, of course, has to start with Stanford University and IDEO, that they came up with this 6-step method around understanding the customer, observing the customer, defining the point of view at the end of the first diamond to really closely articulate who's the user, what's their need, and what's some element of insight or surprise that you've discovered through this first divergent, convergent thinking pair. And then you start with the ideation phase, the first phase of the second diamond. Then you do some prototyping and finally testing. There's a lot of great free tools available on the Stanford D School website. There's tools available from the Hasso-Plattner Institute, the Strachik Center of Entrepreneurship, Reggio Approach. There's a variety of these tools available out there. Second one I'm going to cover briefly is the Strachik Center. This is where I learned design thinking in Munich, Germany. They've taken the Stanford D School and they've added a couple of tools related to team and vision, related to using a business model canvas, and implementing and growing. So similar tool that maps, or set of tools that map onto this double diamond. And I've shared some of the APE method toolbox from the Strachik Center with you. And also I've done several design thinking videos that I've suggested as well, specifically for the master's degree program at the Strachik Center. So I've got a 4-part series on design thinking that's also available on design thinking based on this methodology. Value Proposition Design by Osterwalder. This is a successor to his very world-famous book called Business Model Generation that introduced the business model canvas. Here you go through the first diamond and you capture your insights with a customer profile canvas, this round thing I show here. And then when you get through the second diamond, you capture your insights with a value proposition canvas. These, of course, map into his business model canvas as well, too. One of the textbooks I use for my Advanced Entrepreneurship course at Ryerson University is D4G, or Designing for Growth. Instead of 2 diamonds, they use 4 diamonds, or I think these are hyperbolic paraboloids. I'm not sure exactly what these are. But it starts with understanding the needs, they call it what is, and then envisioning possible solutions, they call it what is, then they go through what wows and what works. So there's a variety of these kinds of tools that you can get from these textbooks as well. Now I'm going to shift to the second very important type of customer, and this is the online customer. These are people that you probably can't get a deep, qualitative, empathetic understanding of using interviewing techniques, but you can get a quantitative measurement of who they are using methods based on the lean startup. It all started with Steve Blank. Eric Reis then followed up with an excellent book called The Lean Startup, which I used as a required textbook for many years. And then I have a new favorite by Ash called Running Lean, Iterating from Plan A to a Plan That Works. There's a lot of good YouTube videos available online about this. These are really good books to have in your library. The Osterwalder books that I mentioned, there's the free chapters available online on their website. All the canvases that they have are available free from the Strategizer website. Lots of good stuff out there for you to read. Feel like you're getting a drink out of a fire hose yet? The Lean Startup starts with You come up with an idea and then right away build it. So lean startup logically comes after design thinking. Usually you start with understanding the customer needs before you build a solution. Lean startup just jumps right in. It's like you have an idea for something, just build it. And then test it, test it, test it, test it. Some of the lean principles that apply to understanding this is you can capture your business model with a canvas or whatever. You identify the riskiest parts of your canvas using divergent thinking. You then categorize and select which ones are the most important to do first using convergent thinking. You then create a test, and you can do some divergent, convergent thinking around which kind of a test would you do, and then you run the experiment, and then you learn from this. This particular image here is from the lean learning cycle based on the value proposition design framework. So what do you measure? Well, for online people, I like to use tools such as Google Analytics, Google Keywords Everywhere, Google Keyword Surfer, which I believe is a Chrome extension, Facebook Ask the Audience, Facebook Ad Manager. You can look at traffic, click-through rates. The idea is to use non-vanity pirate metrics to measure the things that drive revenue and traffic and understanding of your customer. And you can run A/B tests. Let me tell you a quick story about an IP telephony firm that I worked with in Germany several years ago. They had a very nice product that they were selling for about 50 euros a piece, and they were doing okay, making about 2,000-3,000 euros a month on average. And I suggested, why don't you double the price, or triple the price, or quadruple the price? How do you know that 50 euros is the right price point? I can absolutely guarantee you that 50 euros is the wrong amount. Maybe it should be $49.99, maybe it should be $52, but let's play with it. Let's run some experiments. So we did a test where we added an option to buy not just the standard version for 50 euros, but a version with a little bit of free tech support for 100 euros. 86% of people wanted the more expensive one. The revenues practically doubled overnight without changing a single line of code or answering a single phone call for tech support. So we doubled it again to 200. The number of click-throughs went up. The number of people who bought the $200 version was about 80%. We then added a price point at 500 euros. We dropped the 100 and 200, and we had either the 50 or the 500. Again, over 80% of people preferred the $500 version. We increased revenues by 10 times without changing a single line of code. We then added the Dom Perignon version, 10,000 euro version with a free phone number to the CEO's personal cell phone line. It was the same phone number that was on the website anyway. Unlimited free tech support, which nobody ever used. Again, almost 30% of the people bought the 10,000 euro version. It wasn't their money. And IP telephony is an important aspect of a business. So I cheap out on a 50 euro version if there's a 10,000 euro version. And besides, it was being bought by techies and it wasn't their money. We dramatically increased the profitability and revenues of this company without changing a line of code, just by changing the price point and giving people options, learning from the options, and then reacting appropriately. So now we move to the third major type of customer. This is the B2B customer. This is what I think of as the MIT method with Bill Aulet. Bill wrote a really important book called Disciplined Entrepreneurship, and it comes with the workbook as well. Here I am with Bill in Bologna when he's celebrating the launch of the Italian version of his book. Now, Bill focuses on what he calls Innovation-Driven Enterprise, or IDE. So he's not talking about small and medium-sized companies. He's not talking about your local restaurant or something that's not scalable. He's primarily talking about technology-based innovation sold to big companies with big price tags. You can't just build something when you're testing a $25 million bioreactor for waste energy management or something like that. That's, if you're going to make a big $25 million bet, you got to be disciplined. You've got to follow a much more structured approach. And so Bill has these 24 steps of how to understand your customer deeply, how to understand big customers, and how to understand the way in which your customer will be using your product, and how to analyze your market before you place that big $25 million bet on a bio-waste reactor of some sort. So here's his 24-step method. The book's really nice to read. He also has a free version of this available on edX, and he has a lot of good videos as well too. I strongly recommend that if you're doing anything technologically related, that you take a look at Bill's 24-step method. This is very much in harmony with the method that I use when I'm working with Fraunhofer. Fraunhofer is the largest research organization in Europe with about $3 billion a year in contract R&D, 67 different institutes across Germany, 25,000 scientists and engineers with over 30,000 patents and patent families. They invented the MP3. So when I'm working with Fraunhofer and we've got this deep technology, we're trying to figure out how does this technology fit into the architecture and roadmap of the world's largest companies. And so it starts with using the double diamond. It starts by understanding the decision makers at big global companies. They're people too. They have needs too. But they also will potentially be interested in your technology as it fits into their existing technology. And so Bill goes through a several-step process to better understand that user. It starts with market segmentation. He calls it the holy grail of specificity. It starts with market segmentation, and then you define who your potential beachhead customers are, and then you create a customer persona of who the user might be. He maps out who all the decision makers might be within that company. He then says, now create a more detailed customer persona. And then finally, okay, that one's great. Now go find me 10 more. It's a really good process. Bill's method is also very much in harmony with Geoffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm. That usually when you're trying to introduce a new technology, you're not trying to sell to the mainstream, you're trying to sell to these early adopters or these innovators. Part of the reason for that is the innovators will deal with all the bugs that your first version of the product has. They'll deal with the fact that it'll probably break. They'll deal with the fact that it's kind of ugly and you need specialized expertise just to make your version 1 work. The mainstream, people over here, they're going to want version 3 of your product. But you can't survive long enough to get to version 3. You got to make money on version 1. I like to think of it this way. These are big companies with big problems and big money. You've got a solution, they got the problem. Let them pay you to deliver the solution. You shouldn't build it and then see if they want to buy it. Let them pay you to build it because they're the ones with the problem. In most cases, these early innovators have already spent money and failed to solve their own problem. And so when they see you, they'll say, well, what you've done is probably better than what I've already done. So yeah, I'm willing to give it a shot, and I've already spent money on this, so why wouldn't I continue to spend money to solve my big problem? Now, we've talked a lot about the tools, and most of the books focus on tools. And students like to follow this step-by-step kind of planning-based method around use all the tools and you get to a wonderful outcome. But you can't only look at the tools, you also have to look at the mindset. What this figure here shows is from one of my publications a few years ago, that the tools in the method is the way that you often learn it, but as you go up higher, you learn the process, you learn the principles or the rules, and then eventually you habitualize this into a mindset. So whenever you're using the various tools, don't just use the tools that we're talking about, also think about the principles that I'm showing around, for example, user-centricity or the radical collaboration, and we're going to continue to be covering the principles in future episodes. So one of the things I love about Bill at MIT is that in addition to just giving the tools in his 24 steps, he also talks about spirit. He talks about the willingness or even joy in being different. This is a great example here that you got to be willing to swim against the stream and even enjoy that. And this is really part of what this whole hacking culture is, this irreverent creativity to revel in the fact that you're unique and that you're different. You'll certainly get paid better by doing this. And also you'll have greater product differentiation if you're doing your own startup or side hustle or self-employment. Bill also likes to talk about having the spirit of a pirate, this adventurous, kind of iconoclast going against the grain, but having the skills of a Navy SEAL. That you're not just irreverent, but also you've got mad, crazy, great skills and you know what you're doing. Bill explicitly talks about that they're not just trying to create startups, they're trying to create anti-fragile human beings. People who grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors, and love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. That adversity makes you stronger. So every hurdle that you overcome as an entrepreneur is a barrier to entry to everybody else. Love the barriers, love the hurdles, love the adversity, because that's what grows your calluses. This is what grows your muscles. This is what makes you stronger. Now, we talked a little bit in previous episodes about the difference between a job and a career. The same thing applies with this as well, too. In a job, you apply to an ad. They look at your resume and maybe they call for a short interview. But there's very limited focus or even opportunity for you to understand the company and what you're getting yourself in for. It's basically, we have a couple of interviews, take it or leave it. Kind of like an arranged marriage. You know, your parents line you up with some spouse. You get to meet that person once or twice and go, well, yeah, I guess they're okay. But you don't really get to know them until after the deed is done and you're already married. So it's kind of doesn't always work in a job very well that way, and some people are quite dissatisfied in their jobs. In a career, however, you take the time to deeply understand who you're about ready to go and work with. That you take the time to understand your customer, your employer, or the people that you're about to spend the next several years of your life with. We've got a few assignments for you based on user-centricity. First, the assignment will be to brainstorm potential market segments that are in harmony with your design challenge. This is divergent thinking. Then select your primary beachhead customer, ideally following some of Bill's principles in disciplined entrepreneurship. This is a selection process based on convergent thinking techniques. Identify your first 10 potential customers or employers, if you want to think of it that way. Create a customer persona. And again, there's lots of good books, or you could just go online and look up how to do a customer persona. And then interview the first person. Don't ask for a job. Interview that person to understand what they do, what their needs are, what their interests are, what their values are, and to find out, is this the kind of person I'd like to spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with? Again, this isn't a job interview. This is more of a life experience interview to just ask them what their world looks like. So today we learned the fourth major entrepreneurship principle, user-centricity. We talked about that user-centric process includes a double diamond. It starts with the problem and then the solution. We talked about 4 different kinds of customers. There's the qualitative B2C customer, primarily based on Stanford, IDEO, Reggio approach, Sangalen, Hasso-Plattner Institute, and the Strashik Center. We then talked about quantitative B2C lean methods, primarily for online types of customers. These are methodologies that were founded by Steve Blank, Eric Reis, Ash Maurya, and people like that. We then spent a little bit of time talking more about B2B, which is kind of similar to when you're looking for an employer. We talked about B2B customers, where you are trying to get your technology or intellectual property as a part of the overall solution that meets their needs. And we talked about that decision makers in big companies are human beings as well, that they've got needs, they've got competitive issues, and they've got an existing framework within which they make decisions. We talked about the difference between mindset, principles, methods, and tools. And I warned you, don't be fooled by only going through the tools, that step-by-step approach usually only works for planning-based methodologies, but for search-based methodologies, you kind of need to really keep the principles in mind as well. And we gave you some assignments. So, hope you enjoyed getting a drink out of the fire hose today. This is one of our longest episodes with about 6 or 7 different books that we covered. Remember, entrepreneurship is like learning how to play the guitar. Crank it up to 11.